Now, what I have in front of you guys is the UFC Fight Night Abu Dhabi main card bout list. And simply put, it looks amazing. The main event, Robert Whitaker versus Rainer de Ritter. If Rainer de Ritter is able to pull this off, he's like one win away from a title shot. And if Robert Whitaker gets to win this, then he's still in the top five. And in the co-main event, we got Movsar Evloev versus Aaron Pico, which although it's Aaron Pico who's like making his debut in the UFC, this is the number one contenders fight for the featherweight division. And then we have the bantamweight bout between Peter Yan and Marcus McGee, which is also a number one contenders fight, considering Peter Yan is one win away from a title shot. And if Marcus McGee beats Peter Yan, then I don't think anyone's denying that Marcus McGee should get the next shot. And then we also have a bunch of fun bouts like Bryce Mitchell versus Said Nurmagomedov, Sharon Magomedov versus Mark-Andre Barriault, and Nikita Krylov versus Bogdan Guskov. Now, for a fight night card, this looks amazing considering most pay-per-views don't even get this. But that got me thinking, why is it only the Abu Dhabi fight nights or pay-per-views that are absolutely stacked to the brim? Let's compare this fight card with UFC 317 over here. All right, we got Ilya Taporia versus Charles Oliveira, banger fight. Alexander Pantoja versus Kai Kara France. All right, it's okay, but I'm not gonna call it a banger fight because we could have had better matchups. Then we have Benil Dariush versus Renato Moicano. Solid fight on the card. And Brandon Royval versus Joshua Van. Now, this card isn't complete yet, but it's comparable to the Abu Dhabi fight card that we have. But the problem I have with this is because Abu Dhabi is a fight night card. Meanwhile, UFC 317 is the international fight week card, which is basically the Super Bowl of mixed martial arts, more specifically the UFC. But to compare the Super Bowl of the UFC to this absolute artistic piece is simply insulting because one of these should not be this stacked. And I'm looking at the Abu Dhabi fight card and wondering why is it only in Abu Dhabi that we get three ranked matchups? Or I'm sorry, four ranked matchups if you want to include Nikita Krylov versus Bogdan Gushkov. And I don't want to hear anything about, oh, it's because Abu Dhabi's paying more money. Let's be honest, like the UFC has been putting out terrible quality cards over the past year. And it's not just UFC 317 that's awful. UFC 318 and UFC 319 are definitively worse than the Abu Dhabi pay-per-view. Let's look at UFC 318, Max Holloway versus Dustin Poirier. Banger fight. I'm going to be tuning in, of course. Then we get to the co-main event between Marvin Vettori versus Brendan Allen. I do think Marvin Vettori versus Brendan Allen will be fun, but this fight is nowhere near any of the fights on this main card. Hell, Bryce Mitchell versus Said Nurmagomedov, in my opinion, will be a lot more fun than Marvin Vettori and Brendan Allen. Then we have Neil Magny versus Gunnar Nelson as the feature fight of UFC 315, 318, I'm sorry. Two absolute unks of the welterweight division, just uh scrapping at the cookout. Like there is no real stakes in this fight. I don't care about the result of this fight. Both of them are probably going to be fed to a next upcoming prospect regardless. And then we have Adam Fugit versus Islam Dulatov. Islam Dulatov is going to sleep this bum in Adam Fugit. Is it going to be fun? Probably, but do I care about this that much? No. So why is this on the main card of UFC 318? I have no idea, but the fact that this is on the main card of a pay-per-view, meanwhile Abu Dhabi gets nothing but banger matchups is simply disgraceful. And UFC 319, this is the pay-per-view for August. This doesn't look that much better. All right, outside of the main and co-main event between Dricus Duplessis and Hamza Chimaev, as well as Jared Cannonier versus MVP, there's nothing to write about. Like we got Gerald Meerkart and Mikhail Olasechik as the feature fight of this card. All right, I love GM3. GM3 is the goat. He makes me laugh sometimes because of the memes, as well as the fact that he can fraud check people by just looking mid in the first two rounds before finding a way to submit his opponent in the third. But simply put, he's not main card pay-per-view worthy material. Like, sure, if you put him against someone who's ranked, then I'll find him more justifiable. But Mikhail Oleksiejczuk, again, I also love Mikhail Oleksiejczuk, but neither of these guys are simply main card worthy. I think you could have put many other names on the Abu Dhabi fight card alone that would have salvaged UFC 319. Like, we really couldn't have Peter Yan versus Marcus McGee on UFC 319. I'm just saying, like, this card would look absolutely stacked if Peter Yan versus Marcus McGee would be there. But unfortunately, we have to make way for Gerald Mearshart and Mikhail Oleksiejczuk, Edson Barbosa versus Drakkar Klose, and Bobby Green versus Carlos Diego Ferreira. These are all fun fights, but compared to Peter Yan versus Marcus McGee, none of these fights come even close. And that's what I want to talk about is because Dana White is selling out for Abu Dhabi, Saudi Arabia, Azerbaijan, oil money. Dana White does not care when it comes to putting cards in the US or any other country outside of the Middle East. It's only when there's events in the Middle East where Dana White will bend his cheeks over and ask the Turkey Al Sheikh, how deep do you want it? And before you ask, like, it's not just the fight night cards that are absolutely stacked to the brim. Just look at the last pay per view Abu Dhabi got. Ilya Taporia versus Max Holloway, one of the biggest fights of 2024. Robert Whitaker versus Hamza Chimaev, absolute banger of a fight. Winner would have got the next title shot against Dricus Duplessis, as Sean Strickland not took the rematch and absolutely got whooped for 5 rounds straight. Magomed Ankalaev versus Alexander Rakic. Again, the fight wasn't that fun, but this was the number one contenders fight for the light heavyweight division. Leroy Murphy versus Dan Ige. This was arguably the worst fight on the main card, but it's still like relatively ranked featherweights that are like really good. And we got in the main card opener, Sharon Magomedov versus Armin Petrosian. Now, this was the only fight that you could say, all right, sure, this is comparable to that of like the rest of the other pay-per-views. But this is way better than any of the fights that, again, are on UFC 318 or 319, in my opinion, because Sharon Magomedov had a lot of hype at the time. And even the prelims of this Abu Dhabi card were absolutely stacked. Jeff Neal, ranked number 10 in the welterweight division. Matej Rebecki versus Maitabek Orobai, one of the best fights of 2024. Abus Magomedov versus Bruno Ferreira. And Farid Basharat versus Victor Hugo. That there were a lot of fights on UFC 308 that were absolute bangers. But for some reason, Dana White only pulls out the red carpet for Abu Dhabi, Saudi Arabia, and Azerbaijan because they have oil money. At this point, it's very clear to us that Dana White does not care about the fans. It's not like he's putting on blockbuster cards for like US pay per views. It's not like he's promoting fights or anything. Dana White is only trying to put on a good event when Abu Dhabi, Saudi Arabia, or Azerbaijan calls for it. This is simply outrageous. This is why Dana White needs to be fired from the UFC. Because if Dana White actually cared, then he would actually put some effort into putting together decent cards for the rest of pay-per-views and fight nights outside of the Middle East specifically. The fact that Dana White only puts these events on during the Middle East is simply outrageous and it must be stopped. All right, that's going to be for today's video. And before I end this off, I know that some people are going to be in the comments talking about, oh, International Fight Week cards is such a banger, or like the main event for UFC 318 and 319 are bangers, bro. Why are you complaining? Simply put, yes, these main events are amazing. Yes, UFC 317 is pretty good. But Abu Dhabi Fight Nights are equally as good as the international pay-per-view, and they're better than most of the pay-per-views that we got this year. And also, when have we got this stacked of a lineup for any fight night outside of the Middle East? It's simply outrageous that Dana White only puts this out because Turkey Al Sheikh is holding his hand, asking Dana White, "Oh, are you gonna bend your cheeks over for some oil money?" And Dana White's like asking, "Oh, how high do you want my ass up?" But regardless, leave a comment down below what you guys think about this situation. I'm very outraged about this, but I don't know about you guys. So yeah, just if you want to debate me about that, or if you want to support my opinion, just leave a like and comment about what you guys think. But other than that, make sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you guys next time. Peace.